And of course, one of the things that he does is that he holds up the church in the city of Jerusalem as an example or as a model for us to go by. And certainly it is a good model for us to go by, but it's not the only church that we can look at, and we'll make mention of that in just a moment. One of the things that he does is he talks about his father and his father holding a gospel meeting. And I found it interesting, some of the things that he said, that he held a gospel meeting and 110 souls were saved during that series of studies. Then later he had held a meeting there and gospel. Somebody, how many? At one time. Maybe during a gospel meeting, let's just say all week, maybe. Boy, you're quiet. Two, maybe? Two? Okay. It's interesting. I held a meeting up in Ohio, and I would see the 3 or 4 baptized on a meeting that I had there in Fremont or Clyde. I forget now which one it was. We baptized them at Fremont's building, but I think it might have been when I was at a meeting in Clyde. I was involved in the work in Chisinau in Moldova. In the late 90s, I think is when we were there on the first occasion. Phil Morgan and I was there. We studied, baptized one lady, and then we had a study with what they called a theater group. We called them that because they met in a theater. There was quite a number of them. There were over 200. And they were about as mixed up on things of the Bible as any people you'd ever possibly see. They had just taken the Bible, just opened up the Bible, began reading it from the book of Genesis to the book of Revelation. And they were trying to do what the Lord told them to do without anybody directing them or any help or anything, just reading and doing things. And so there were a number of things, obviously, that they were extremely confused about. So Phil and I talked quite a bit about what we would do with them and how we would study with them and approach the study. They, like I said, there were a number of things that they were mixed up on, but we decided none of the other things mattered if you couldn't teach them the gospel by which they could be saved to begin with. None of the other things mattered if they weren't saved by the grace of God. So that's what we kind of concentrated on, was the simple gospel message. He who believes and is baptized shall be saved. We studied with them several nights. They'd get us way off out in left field somewhere with questions, and we'd always try to bring them back to he who believes and is baptized shall be saved. I know they got tired of hearing that. And one night we were doing this and had this study, and sure enough, they went off out in left field, and here we bring them back, and they look at each other and they grin. Well, 12 or 14 of them had just obeyed the gospel and been baptized into Christ. And then Phil and I left and came back to the States. Larry Payton and his wife Linda went over and followed up. And they continued the studies. And they were 90 baptized one night. And so kind of remind me of things that were going on during biblical days. Things just right. You know, people that wanted to know, people that wanted to study, and people who was receptive to the truth. And so you see people sometimes, and you catch things just exactly right, and still there are great numbers of people that can obey the gospel. How many people do you think have been baptized? Now, I've just kept up with this since I've been here at Hickory Heights. How many people do you think have been baptized in the almost 8 years that we've been here? It has nothing, and please don't misunderstand why I'm asking this. This has absolutely zero to do with me. But I'm just telling you this to kind of put this in perspective, that you can see the work that's been done by various individuals in this audience. How many people do you think? You're pretty close. Anybody else? 25? That's real close. I think there's been about 26. 26 people have been baptized. Now, that's people here, and that was some people that I've baptized in some meetings that I helped as well. But you were involved in that because you allowed me to go and preach the gospel. So it's not like that there's not being good things that are happening, and it's not like that there are not people being taught the gospel and people are responding to it, because they are responding to it. Could they be more, though? Well, yeah, they could be a lot more, couldn't they? And a lot of it has to do with us individually and how we're willing to study with other people and trying to share the gospel with them, to take advantage of opportunities, because it's the people that you come in contact with, the people that you know personally many times, that you have an opportunity to share God's message with them. And so there's a lot of good things that's going on. It's amazing to me, and I read this every week, and if you get any reports from any of the preachers in Zimbabwe, there's great numbers of people that are being baptized into Christ in Zimbabwe every single week. And so there's a lot of good things that are going on. And the kingdom is growing. Now, I don't know what the percentages of that would be. And I don't know how we could arrive at a percentage or how the numbers were increasing unless you knew all the work that was being done in countries like Zimbabwe and other countries like that. But there's a lot of good things that are being done in the world, and a lot of people are being taught the gospel, and there's a lot of people that are responding to it. Now, you and I are we live in our little part of the world here, and this is about all we know and see sometimes is what goes on in the city of Lewisburg and what goes on from the church here at Hickory Heights. But there's a lot of other good things that are going on. There's a lot of people that are responding. There's a lot of churches that are growing, but there's a lot of other churches that obviously are drying up, and they're not there anymore. And I know that and I see that, but there are some that are growing and some that are doing what they need to do as far as the personal evangelism or local evangelism. All right, any thoughts or questions?
Put it in perspective.
Mm-hmm.
Again, when they were rebuilding the wall, every man had a little section, and as
Yep.
long as he did his section, then
Yep.
the whole wall got built. We don't need
Yep.
to be worried about what everybody else is doing. The question is, are we doing what we should be doing? If we're building our part of it, then the whole thing will eventually get done.
Well, it will, and we will share God's message with other people if we'll just take care of our work and the work that God has given us to do. And there are things that all of us can do as we look about us. We all have talents and we all have ability. Not all of us have the same talent, the same amount of talents, the same ability, but we all have some talents and we all have ability. The problem is our willingness to use our talents and our willingness to use our ability that we have. But we have that. And so we certainly need to use the talents and the abilities that God has given us to share His message with other people. If we look about us, there's always opportunities, I think. And a lot of times, not everybody's going to be receptive to it. And so don't be discouraged when people are not receptive to it. Did Jesus teach everybody He came in contact with? I mean, He tried to teach them, but did they respond to His teaching? And the answer to that is no. They didn't all respond to it. Did everybody respond to the apostles preaching and teaching? Well, no. There were great numbers of people that didn't. But there were people who did respond, and there were people who obeyed. And so what we have to do is to make sure that we do our best to share that message with other people as opportunities presents themselves. But yeah, you're right, Tony. That's a good observation. All right, any other thoughts before we get into the questions? Okay, let's look at the questions. Now, there are 16 verses or 16 texts that he gives us in this particular lesson. A lot of these is about the growth of the early church and what they did, and particularly what the church in the city of Jerusalem did. And the things that the church in the city of Jerusalem did, we certainly can use that as a pattern for us to share God's message with other people. There's a lot of methods that we could use. And I've heard this for years, and I think this is the case. I'm convinced of this anyway. Regardless of the method that you might select or the church might select to use in personal evangelism, I think that method will work if we'll work the method. Do you get my point? If you'll work the plan. Just like if you have a plan But you have to put that plan into action. If you don't put it into action, I don't care what the plan is. It's not going to accomplish anything, is it? So regardless of what the plan is, and I've heard this through the years, you know, in various places that I've been, I've talked about trying to do certain things. And well, we tried that, and that didn't work. Well, okay, maybe it didn't. Maybe it didn't work hard enough. Maybe it'll work now. Or maybe do you have a different plan that we could use to try to evangelize, to reach out and to teach people the gospel? But it takes effort on our part. And I think the thing that we lack sometimes, even with the methods that we might select, as long as they're scriptural, I think the thing that's lacking is what we looked last week of talking about prayer. And I don't think we pray nearly enough about the work and our lives and our personal efforts to share the gospel with other people. For opportunities that we have, to see the opportunities, for us to open our mouths and to speak lovingly but boldly, and to share God's message, and so that people can come to know the truth. And so regardless of what it is, we have to put that into practice, whatever that might be. All right, any other thoughts? All right, what is the growth rate for the Lord's church in the United States? Now, I assume that he's talking about what he had just mentioned on the opening page. What was the growth rate that he was talking about? What was it from 1945 to 1965? We're not talking about a percentage, but so much, or numbers. All right, it was rapidly grew, didn't it? Do you think there's a reason for that? And I guess he asked another question about that in a little bit. But do you think that there are contributing factors to why it grows more at certain times than it does at other times?
Definitely think it's a critical factor of why it stopped growing in the 60s because of all the division. So we know that unity must be part of the formula for churches to grow.
That's a good observation. And certainly there was a lot of division, fussing, and fighting among ourselves. And really over institutionalism was what it was, the division was over. So yeah, that could be it. All right, what about from 1965 to 1980? Yeah, lost members. Now, this would be according to the data, obviously, that they could get. That doesn't necessarily mean that that was the exact thing. I mean, it could be. Because I dare say when that was taken, social media wasn't available and things weren't nearly as easy to get information about in countries, for instance, like in Zimbabwe and some of the African countries and various places like that. But anyway, that's what he was talking about in this. And then from 1980 onward, all right, barely, yeah. And so, you know, even up to this moment in time, you know, many times we don't see lots and lots of growth. I mean, there's spurts of growth sometimes that you may see. But we have to work to make sure that we do our best to teach people the gospel. Just like here, the church here has done very well, I think, as concerning if you're just looking at numbers. And numbers is not the things that we're just totally looking at. Behind every number, there's a soul. But yet, if every church was growing and every church was teaching the gospel and all of them were baptizing a number of people, and so there would be quite a bit of growth if every church was able to do that. Now, it's not true in every place. You know, I spent 11 and a half years in Tullahoma, and growth there was really hard to come by, I'm going to tell you. The church did grow some and baptized several, but not as much as some other areas that I've seen. And I don't really know what the difference was, other than the fact that sometimes the city is a little more worldly. There's a little more wealth that's involved in that city. There's a lot of people that are wealthy in the city of Tullahoma, and those are contributing factors. You take around a town like Nashville, for instance, that you can see there. Worldliness is rampant there. Wealth is there. Lots of things for people to do, and so it's a little harder sometimes to people to come by that are willing to sit down and open up their Bibles and studies. And so there's a lot of contributing factors that we certainly can see. But yet there's still people, though, that are willing to study, and people are willing to listen. But what we have to do is to work hard to try to find them. All right, any thoughts about that?
Something that Mac and I were just looking at, and will amaze most of the people in this audience, that in the 1950s, what would you say the average attendance was?
Oh, I dare say it's probably over 200.
Nearly 300.
Yeah.
I mean, over time, and we look at it, if we don't add 10% or more,
Oh, yeah.
you're going down every year because that many people die with our meeting. So,
Right.
that again shows kind of what that division did to this congregation as well as other congregations.
Oh, yeah. Well, and two, I mean, looking at people, we talked about how many people were baptized. How many people do you think have passed on since in the last 8 years from here? How many do you think? Well, a little less than that. But I counted about 19 or 20. About 19 or 20 people have passed on that used to sit in these pews. And so now you take that, you put that in perspective. Just think if we had 19 or 20 more people here tonight, what would the audience look like? What would the building look like? Be a little fuller? Obviously wouldn't. But yet, that's what happens. When I was at Chapel Hill, when I first went there were 23. And of course, there's what, Ann? Is there three of those still living? You and Hazel and Yvonne Farr. And that's pretty well it. And all the others are dead. And of course, we got up to about in the 80s there at one time, and stayed in the 50s and 60s for a long time. But now look what's happened. So, yeah, that's what happens to churches. Church at Hillview in Nashville. When I left there, we were running in the 110s, and well over half of that congregation has died. Well over half of it. They've died and gone on. I mean, I was there last year in a meeting, and I could look out over the audience, or year before, whenever it was. I think it's last year. And I could look at the pews and who used to sit here. Well, they're not there anymore. They're dead and gone. So, that happens. And a lot of congregations, that's just like in towns the size of Lewisburg. A lot of times your kids grow up, they go off to college, and how many of them come back? A lot of them don't come back. And they go to churches in larger towns around. And it's churches in larger towns, suburbs of larger towns, usually that are growing. But they're getting those who are already been taught and are members and already obeyed the gospel. I mean, that's a growth as far as number-wise, but that's not people that they're baptizing. So that's so that's a little different than them teaching the gospel and evangelizing and teaching somebody and bringing them to Christ, somebody that never has been obedient to the gospel. And so there's a little difference in those kind of things. But there's a reason for those things. All right. All right, what is the model for local evangelism? All right, the church in Jerusalem. And this is what he uses, and certainly, as I said, certainly it would be good for us to look at that. There are other churches as well. You can look at the church at Thessalonica, and he said, "Far from you sounded out the word of the Lord." And so they were commended for sounding out the word of the Lord. You can look at the church at Philippi, and Paul writes and commends them for the support that they had given him. And of course, so that he could go forth and preach and teach the gospel. You look at the 7 churches of Asia, and you look at, there were a number of great things that was said about really pretty well all 7 of those churches, 6 of them at least. Laodicea is the one that was lukewarm. But even those other churches that negative things were said about them, there were still some positive things that they were doing that was good within itself. 2 churches had nothing negative said about them. And so here would be model churches of personal evangelism. But certainly the church in the city of Jerusalem was a great model for us to go by. Very unique situation, I think, in the city of Jerusalem. Don't you think it was unique to the city itself at that time? I think it was unique for that time. There were over, I have heard of at least 1 million people in the city of Jerusalem at that time. And I've heard others make comments that there could have been as many as 2 million people within the city. They came there to observe a Jewish holy day. You had the apostles there. They had the ability to perform miracles. And so by the miracles and the things that they did and their teaching and their effort, then you had 3,000 people that was converted on that day. 3,000 was a small amount of people in comparison to the great numbers of people that were there. But once again, you have a very unique situation there. But still, though, the things that they did are great examples for us, and so that we can pattern our work and our growth by, hopefully, as we do what they did. All right, any other thoughts? Then the third question, he said, trace the numerical growth of the church in the city of Jerusalem before they were scattered by persecution. Scattered in Acts the 8th chapter, you remember, because of Paul and because of the persecution that they faced as a result of him. And a lot of the early persecution, at least, of the church, and you and I have studied this before, a lot of the persecution that happened in that church was Jewish persecution. It wasn't Roman persecution, but this would be Jewish persecution, and that's the reason that they were scattered abroad, was because of the Jews persecuting Christians. All right, Acts 2:41. All right, and how many? All right, about 3,000. So you had 3,000 that responded, 3,000 that were obedient to the gospel. In Acts 2, verse 47. How many? Yeah, they added to the church daily. Didn't tell us the number, it just said they were adding daily. But you can see their commitment and their obedience. Verse 41 talked about their obedience. The 3,000 was added there. And then, of course, their commitment you can see in verses 42. And because they were really committed to the Lord and to one another and to the truth, then you can see then what was happening and what was occurring, that the Lord was adding to the church daily those that were being saved. Acts 4, verse 4. Yeah, about 5,000 men. So 5,000 men. Wasn't talking about women, those who may be younger. All right, Acts 5:14. All right, multitudes of both men and women, he said. And so there was a great number. Acts 6, verse 7. Yeah, multiplied greatly. Then there's something else that said there in that text too. What else? Yeah, the priest, about the priest. It said many of the priests were obedient. You know, that's an important factor in all this, I think, if you look at this. This would be Jewish priests. And so you can see the impact then that they were having upon those that were serving in that capacity. The apostles were taking the scriptures and from those Old Testament scriptures proving that Jesus was the Christ and the Messiah that they had been looking for. And of course they were taught the gospel, and so priests were being obedient to the Lord. And so you have 3,000, the Lord adding to the church daily. You have 5,000 men, multitudes of both men and women. And then multiplied greatly, and even the priests were obedient. And so you can see then the growth of the early church and how it was growing. All right, any thoughts about those? All right, then he said, list and biblically prove the characteristics of the Jerusalem church which helped them be so successful in local evangelism. What did you list for A? All right. And so they were truly converted, and they were faithful as well. If you continue steadfastly in something, you're faithful and loyal to that. And so what you have is, you have people not only that was converted, but as a result of them being converted, they were committed. And so we can be converted, but we need to be committed as well. And of course, if we are that, then we'll do our work, I think, and do it well. What about B? All right, heard the word and believed in Acts 4:4. Okay. Anybody have anything different? Had favor with all people. Okay. Acts 2:47. Okay. Lives were godly. Okay. And of course, I think this is where the word comes in that he uses, that they were it was attractive to other people. When it says they had favor with the people, what did he mean by that? If you have favor with the people, what do? If I have favor with someone, what do I have? Agree? Okay. Respect? Okay. Attention? Okay. Their attention? All right. Love for one another? Okay. Well, I think if I have favor with them, I have an influence upon them. And it's really the life that I am living and leading, and I think it was the life that they were living and leading. Because now he just said that in Acts 2 and verses 42 of what they had done. They continued steadfastly in the apostles' doctrine, fellowship, and breaking of bread and in prayer. But now all of a sudden, the Lord was saving people daily because of the favor or because of the influence that they had with other people. It's kind of, there's a word that we use, and of course I had a sermon on this just a few weeks ago, of talking about adorning the doctrine. We can see that word used in Titus 2 and verses 10. Now what we can do is we can either make the doctrine attractive or appealing, or we can cause it to be blasphemed. Now we do that by the way that we live and lead our lives. Now that's what this church at Jerusalem was doing. They had favor with the people. Could people see Christ living in them? Can people see Christ living in us? If they can't, they should. And it's because of that we can have an influence upon them. All right, what'd you put for C? All right, use every scriptural means. And of course, it talked about daily in the temple and from house to house that we can see. Acts 5 and verses 42. Whatever means that was, whatever scriptural means is given, then use that to share the gospel. That's what they were doing. Could there be different methods when you would teach in the temple versus what you might teach from house to house? Well, yeah. In the temple, what would you have to know? If you're teaching people in the temple, what do you think you'd have to know? The law, the Old Testament. You'd have to be able to take that Old Testament and from that Old Testament prove that Jesus was the Christ. He's the Messiah that you've been looking for. He's the one that had been prophesied. He's the prophet that Moses said that you have to listen to. He's here. He's arrived. And he suffered and died. And he rose again the third day. And so that would be one of the things that they would use. From house to house, it has to deal with the people in the house, whoever made up that household. You know, and early on it was all Jews, but I guess the same kind of methods, but you know, it'd be more of one-on-one and more little personal things that you might be able to discuss one day. All right, D. What'd you put?
Let preachers preach.
All right, let preachers preach. And certainly that's the case. In Acts 6, verses 1 and 2, they didn't want to leave the preaching and the teaching of the gospel to serve at tables. You know, they had the ability to preach and teach. And of course, he was talking about the apostles here. Others, they had that ability. They were inspired by God. They could do that. They could share that message. Others could do those things. And it wasn't that the other things that was to be done, it wasn't that those things weren't important. They were important. But also was the preaching and the teaching of the gospel as well. Paul talks about that in Acts 20 and verses 20 as well. You know, I've heard for a long time and for years said, let the preachers preach, let the elders ale, let the deacons serve. And so let the elders serve what they, you know, in the capacity that they need to be serving in. And some of the other things, some other people can take care of those things. And but we need to be busy doing our best to share the gospel with other people. All right, what about E? What'd you put?
They spoke up for the truth.
All right, spoke up for the truth. And really, yeah, even if it meant persecution, and it did mean persecution sometimes. And really, when you stand for the truth, many times you have to expose the error that other people were teaching. And of course, that's one of the things that we can see that happened in Acts 6, verses 9 and 10. That's one of the things that Stephen did, didn't it? Stephen lost his life as a result of doing that. But you have to be able to defend the truth. All right, F? Okay. Okay, local church doing its work, sending forth preachers. Kathy, did you say something? All right, overcome obstacles. Any obstacle that would hinder. They were persecuted. We can see that in Acts the 8th chapter. But did that stop them from going everywhere and preaching the gospel? Well, no. And that's a good example for us. Will we find ourselves being persecuted sometimes as a result of standing for what's right? Maybe not to the degree that the New Testament church did, but we're still going to find that that's going to happen to us sometimes. People are not going to like us, and they're going to despise us, and they may say all manner of evil against us, but yet we have to continue to stand for what's right. And so let no obstacle hinder you from doing what you know that you should do. You will find opposition, but yet continue to be faithful. So those are all some really good thoughts, I think, as he expressed in this study. All right, any other thoughts about those? They were. And of course, that meant the unity that existed among them. Sunday night's lesson, Lord willing, this coming Sunday night, we'll be talking about the expression one another. That's used quite a bit. And I want to share some thoughts with you about that. And of course, of what we can do and what we can accomplish as a result of being, loving and caring about one another. All right. Any others? All right. Why are we not reaching the lost in America as our forefathers did 50 years ago?
Something that really opened my eyes to this is my fiance spent she went 2 or 3 times to Malawi over in Africa. Having nothing. And just by being an American citizen, you are, and I forget what the percentage is, but you're wealthy in perspective of the world. And I think that, and this is something that I've talked to her about, every time she's gone over there, there have been a lot, like kind of like you were talking about on a trip you were on, where a lot of people obey the gospel. A lot of people do. And in this country, we have so much that it's almost like so many people have so many things that they don't see the need for a Savior and to have that spiritual salvation, and to have that salvation because, hey, I got everything I need now. And those people that are in places like that don't have anything, they're looking for something, anything. And I think that we are very blessed, but in this country, that's one reason I think it's been a detriment to the gospel being spread at times because people don't have that need and that desire. Does that make sense?
Yeah, they don't recognize the need.
Yeah.
They have the need, they just don't recognize it. So yeah. And I think that's true. It's worldliness, what we talk about, and it's materialism. Materialism is a great hindrance to the gospel of Jesus Christ. Because you begin, instead of realizing that you're dependent, you're independent. Instead of recognizing that you do have needs, you think, I don't need anything that you guys have got. So yeah, you're exactly right. And that's a great hindrance. It really is. Mm-hmm.
People are looking for an experience.
Oh, yeah.
They're getting out of their church other than coming in line with the truth of God.
Yeah, and the problem what you're talking about there is, it's more about me than it is the Lord. What do you have to offer me, to entertain me? And, what do you have to offer? That's one of the questions that I've had asked of me. What do y'all offer there? Well, we offer the gospel. That's what we have. And that's all we have. Yeah, but yeah, you're right. And once again, that gets back to the kind of the ideal of materialism and worldliness. That's the kind of the worldly thought. All right, any other thoughts? Well, that's exactly right. And just as we were talking the other day, it all begins in the home and home life. And that's what we've been talking about recently. That's where it begins. And so we have to teach them, and then they have to teach their children. And then we have to do everything that we can to teach everybody else's children along the way as well. So yeah, you're exactly right. Brian?
I think sometimes what I've seen, and I've been guilty of it at times in my life, I think, like Carson says, the more abundance we have in this country, I think sometimes the people in the world really, we have allowed ourselves to almost become closer to the world than we should, so people really don't see the difference. I think 50 years ago, when you had somebody really living that Christian life and was excited and zealous about it, there was a stark difference between the Christian and the lost person in the world. And today, I think some people, you might call it hypocrisy. I think sometimes we're hypocrites. We teach something, but then again, we're not living
at least borders on that. Yeah. And so, yeah, we have to be careful, very, very careful about that. And, you know, they should see something different in us. Yeah, you know, somebody told me some time ago, and I thought about this, and I think they're exactly right. Two of the great things that's been invented in our country that really has damaged or stopped us from interacting with our neighbors. What two things do you think that it would be? What? Social media? But TV. TV's one. Well, air conditioning. There you go. That's the two things. Now you think about that. What did people used to do in the afternoon? Where they used to sit? Yeah, you used to sit on the porch. Where do they sit now? Where do you sit? It's where I find myself too. I try to go out on the porch and sit. Sometimes I get awful hot and I come back in. But it's really has spoiled us, and we don't interact with our neighbors across the street or next door like we used to. And those are some things that have hindered, I think, the progress of the gospel as well. And it's not that those things are wrong within themselves, but we can make them wrong. It's just like things being sinful. There are things that are not sinful within themselves, but we can make them sinful. Yeah, you know, I jotted down, you know, a couple of things here. I think there are a number of factors. One thing is a lack of commitment on our part. I don't think we're as committed as the New Testament church was. And we're not quite as concerned about our neighbors being lost, and we don't see them lost. And we doesn't seem to be as concerned about them spending eternity in the fires of hell like we should, or even our own people. And we need to be concerned about that. Do you think fear and immaturity stops us from trying to teach other people the gospel of Jesus Christ? Yeah. Have you ever concerned yourself with, they may ask you a question too hard for you to answer? You ever been concerned about that? Be honest with yourself now. Well, as I said, you know, even if they ask us something that we don't know, that's a great opportunity for us to set up future studies. Well, let me study that and get back with you. So don't let that, and of course, as Carson said, I think worldliness and materialism, those are all some things I think that hinder us and hinders the work of the church. All right, any thoughts? We're not going to get through these if I don't hurry up here a little bit. He said, are there specific factors that contributed to evangelistic success in Jerusalem that we cannot duplicate? Yeah, they are some things. Now he goes on, he said, if so, what are they? Now what were some of the things? And we talked a little bit about that just a moment ago. Yeah, the apostles were there. Obviously, we don't have any apostles. And when you think about the apostles, they had the Holy Spirit. They were baptized in the Holy Spirit. They had miracles. They could speak in other languages. But not only that, it's the miracles that they could perform. And you remember the promise that Jesus made to them. He said, you don't have to worry about what you've got to say. He said, I'll tell you what to say. That's the reason he sent the Spirit. You know. And so they were guided into all truth. And like I said, there's a number of things. It was a Jewish holy day. There were thousands of people within the cities, the miracles that were done by the apostles, and of course the apostles were inspired. And so, yeah, there's a number of things that we couldn't duplicate this day and time. But he goes on, he said, does this mean we cannot follow other factors that led to their success? But no, certainly, absolutely not. There are some things that we can do. And there are a number of things that we've already mentioned that they did that we can do as well. It's a question of whether or not we're willing to do that, I think, a lot of times, and whether we're committed to do that. If we're committed to try our best to share God's message with other people, then there's a lot more work that could be done. Let me ask you this question. You answer this for yourself. Do you think that there's more that you could do personally in teaching people the gospel? And if you did a little more yourself, do you think more people would be converted and at least would have the opportunity to know and understand the truth? So all of us have to answer that, and we have to deal with that. Name specific things the local church can do to follow each part of the pattern of evangelistic success of the congregation in Jerusalem. What did you say? Somebody give me one. All right, praise, honor, and glorify God. Okay. All right.
that we can be as individuals.
And we do. We have to look seriously and soberly, doesn't it? You know, the Bible is the mirror of the soul. You want to see yourself as God sees you, just look. You know, it's a dangerous thing to start comparing ourselves with other people, but that's one of the things I'm afraid sometimes that we do. And the person that we want to compare ourselves to is the person who may be the weakest and the person that does the least. But look at ourselves and to see what it is that we can do. All right, any other thing? Tony?
Summarize it, to me, it just looked like we see how successful they were, do the same things they did, practice the same things they did, and we should get the same result.
Okay. That certainly would be part of that. That's what they were willing to do. Just think about that for just a moment, though. In Acts 8, when they were persecuted, what did they do? Did they go hide somewhere? Did they feel sorry for themselves? Or did they continue to preach the gospel? You know, that's what we have to do. What if you knock on the first door and somebody comes to the door and they slam the door in your face? Does that mean that you go home and you roll up in your covers and you say, I'm never going out again just because of that one person? I remember being in Canada, in Kingston, Ontario, where William Stewart's at. I saw more no solicitation signs on the doors than any place I ever saw in my entire life. I've never seen as many. And there was one on the outside gate of this house, and the doors were open, and I saw a guy get out of the car. He went in the side door, and I could see him through the hall of the house, and he looked like he was in the back part of the house in the kitchen. He was looked like groceries in. I assumed that's what it was. Out front was a no solicitation sign. And I said, I'm going to try anyway. So I went in, and of course I knocked on the door. You know what my response was? He yelled throughout the house, can't you read that sign? I said, yes, sir. I left. So what can you do other than that? I knocked on another door. Lady answered the door. She looked like she was of Chinese descent. And she almost came to tears. She said, I told her what I was doing. She said, oh, I have been praying that someone would come all day. Now, I'm going to tell you, that right there made it worth every no that I received just to go in and talk to that lady for just a little while. That was an interesting conversation we had. So, yeah, you know, being committed to the work and sharing. People will reject you, but keep working. You know, the Lord did. You know, those are one of the things. Anything else? We only have about 3 or 4 minutes. So, okay. List things you can do to help the local church to be more successful at reaching the lost in your community. What can you do? Name some things that you know that you can do. You know you can do these things. All right, invite people to service. That's not too hard, is it? What else? All right. And certainly that has an effect or an impact upon other people's lives when they see that you're the salt of the earth and lights of the world. You know, that's one of the great things that you can do. What else? Anybody? I'm sorry, Ann. Don't go share your problems with the community. Well, that's true. Sad thing is that sometimes people do that, don't they? Yeah, that is so true. You know, one of the things too, can't you pray for the laborers? Can't you encourage other people as well? Aren't there all things that you and I can do? Can't we have the right attitude toward each other and toward the lost? Can't we love each other and care about one another? You know, all those things are just little things that we can do that makes all the difference in the world. One other question. We have about a minute or two. Can we improve on the pattern of local evangelism left by the congregation in Jerusalem? Can we improve upon that? No, we can't improve upon the Bible. You know what the Bible teaches us. We have to take into consideration a couple of passages that I'll give you here. 2 John 9, Galatians 1, verses 6 through 10. And, of course, we can see that the gospel is God's power to save. We see that in Romans 1, verses 16 and 17. And so let's share God's message, share it in the way that He wants us to. Let's share it with love in our hearts and concern for the lost do everything that we can to share that message with them. Let them see that we love the Lord, we love the truth, and we love their soul. All right, any thoughts? Don. All I can say to that is amen, Don. You're exactly right. You know, that's one of the reasons sometimes that people don't want to say anything, because they don't know what to say. And they're afraid that, you know, they're going to be asked some question that they don't know. But yeah, that's part of growth and maturity, and, you know, you should. We should have a desire to want to attend. All right, we'll stop there. Thank you.
Mark your song book to number 269. 269. Sing that following invitation. For the invitation, turn to number 424. 424. Gospel of the Lord. Upon the Lord has made the race, through one has come the fall. Where sin has come, must go His grace. The gospel is for all. The blessed gospel is for all. The gospel is for all. Where sin has come, must go His grace. The gospel is for all. Say not that heathen are at home, beyond we have no call. For why should we be blessed alone? The gospel is for all. The blessed gospel is for all. The gospel is for all. Where sin has come, must go His grace. The gospel is for all. Receive ye freely, freely give. From every land they call. Unless they hear, they cannot live. The gospel is for all. The blessed gospel is for all. The gospel is for all. Where sin has come, must go His grace. The gospel is for all.
Of course, a Russian by the name of Mickells, Bernadette, I guess that's, I'm sure I butchered that, but that's close to the point. He abandoned Marxism or communism for Christianity. And he insisted that neither history nor theology nor the church brought him to his faith. But there was a woman by the name of Maria that had a great impact on his life. He said he was present at the concentration camps when the Nazis were murdering the Jews in the gas chamber. He tells the story that there was a distraught mother who refused to part with her baby. She wouldn't give up her baby. And when Maria saw the officer was only interested in numbers, but without a word, she pushed the mother aside and quickly took her place. She died instead of the mother with her baby. This action revealed to Nikolai the heart really of Christianity and really what atonement means. Now you think of the effect that this woman had upon this man. says this. That was John 15:13, John 15:14. You are my friends if you do whatever I command. Now what did he command? That I believe in Christ. That I repent of my sin. That I confess my faith that Jesus is Lord. I be buried in the waters of baptism, where I contact the Spirit for the remission of my sins. stands outside the window and calls her and talks to her on the phone through the window. So you can do that if you want to. So that would be good. And I know she would probably appreciate that. I spoke with her today, and she was, she loved to talk to you. You had to talk to her for a while. You know, you already called and talk to her. And any of the others that you possibly can as well. Some of them are a little harder to get in touch with. We've been having a little trouble getting in touch with Sister Hoot and Brother Ryan, but we tried and we'll continue to try and see if we can get in touch with them. Are there any others that we need to make mention of before we dismiss? You keep doing good things. You keep doing your work and you're doing it well. This church will continue to grow, but it takes you, and you can do it. And I know you can. I have confidence. I know you can do it. And let's encourage each other. Let's love each other. Serve one another. What we do to that, and good things will come. You live your life to bring honor and glory to God. God bless you. And I just know it. For nothing else, I ask you to bow. Don, Elizabeth, and closing prayer. Don.
Father in heaven, we're thankful this week and this opportunity to come together, study your word, worship you as our true living God. We pray that having been here tonight, we would be more motivated to serve you better in the future than we have in the past. I'm mindful of our brothers and sisters who have health problems, that you would bless them, to be your will, they could receive healing, comfort. We pray that you be with us as we go forth in this building tonight, like our license and code, might have safe treatment. We pray that glory and honor be to you in all things. Whenever you save us, we wait. In Christ's name.
Amen.